Brigadier General Muhammad Akramania, a representative of the Iranian army, made a statement on state television, warning that U.S. bases are within range of Iranian medium-range missiles. According to him, the Americans have numerous bases in the region, and all of them are within the range of Iranian weaponry. Akramania emphasized that U.S. positions are vulnerable to attack using a wide range of semi-precision weapons and short-range drones. This statement is one of the most detailed public descriptions of Iran's targeting capabilities made by a military official during the current crisis. Some media outlets suggest that the U.S. might strike Iran in the near future, although Washington has not confirmed any timelines. Meanwhile, the accumulation of American military personnel and equipment in the region continues. Akramania stated that even the slightest strike on Iran would be met with an immediate response, as Iranian forces are on high alert and authorized to respond without waiting for additional orders. According to him, any act of aggression by the U.S. would have unpleasant consequences for Americans. The military official acknowledged that a military attack against Iran by the U.S. is possible, and that Trump's rhetoric suggests continuous pressure in any form. Akramania warned that if Americans make a miscalculation and strike, it will not be a swift and decisive operation, as Trump might expect. Akramania described a scenario where Trump might expect an operation to be followed by a tweet about its completion 2 hours later. However, according to him, nothing of the sort will happen. Iran will not allow any strike to be characterized as a swift, completed operation, and will view any expectations of a limited conflict as a strategic error on Washington's part. According to Akramania, Americans might miscalculate again by expecting a quick and limited operation. He warned that the war would spread across the entire region, from Israel to countries where the U.S. has military bases near Iran. This statement clearly warns that the conflict would not be limited to Iran, but would spread throughout the region. According to Akramania, Iran would strike not only American forces, but also Israel, and potentially the territories of countries hosting American military facilities. Such a warning reflects Iranian doctrine aimed at increasing the costs of any military action against Tehran, and is intended to deter an attack by making the potential consequences unacceptable for Washington and its regional partners. Iran views the recent conflict as valuable experience that has strengthened its current position. According to Iranian military statements, any delays or hesitations in response are considered a strategic mistake that Tehran no longer intends to repeat. State media reports that the Iranian military leadership presents the outcome of the previous conflict as confirmation of the effectiveness of its deterrence strategy. Officials claim that the strikes did not lead to the collapse of the state, did not divide society, and did not destroy Iran's command structure, but only strengthened national resolve. Sharing their vision of the situation, Iranian officials signaled their readiness for an immediate response. In interviews on state television, they warn that any future strike will provoke a faster and more powerful response than in previous conflicts. This narrative presents Iran as a country that has learned from past experiences and adjusted its stance accordingly. Meanwhile, President Trump announced the deployment of American warships to the region. "We have a lot of very big and powerful ships, and it would be great if we didn't have to use them," he said. Trump also emphasized 2 key priorities in any engagement with Tehran: nuclear capabilities and the treatment of protesters. He noted that there had been communications, and he expects further ones, although the details of these contacts have not been independently confirmed. Trump's statements reflect American deterrence rhetoric, positioning military force as support for diplomatic demands. American defense officials present this stance as pressure to achieve a deal, while maintaining military options. Quote 2, Trump emphasized, defense officials clarified that military capabilities support diplomatic goals rather than replacing them. The Iranian side continues to respond to American statements. Akramania stated that American aircraft carriers have serious vulnerabilities, although these claims cannot be independently verified. This statement expands the scope of Iranian threats to include carrier strike groups, which represent a significant American power projection capability. Tehran characterizes its missile and drone capabilities as sufficient to threaten American naval power. The balance between Iranian offensive systems and American defensive capabilities remains unclear. American military officials have not publicly responded to specific Iranian claims about carrier vulnerabilities. The situation remains tense, and each side continues to present its position, highlighting the complexity and unpredictability of the conflict. The conflict is escalating. Akramania's warning about countries hosting U.S. military bases near Iran raises questions about which states might be targeted in case of conflict escalation. According to experts, the American military presence is spread across several countries in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. The warning creates a difficult situation for countries hosting U.S. troops. According to regional analysts, these states are forced to balance their relations with Washington and the risk of being drawn into a conflict with Iran if tensions escalate into open hostilities. International sources report that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have already indicated that they do not want their territories used for strikes against Iran. Such signals may indicate these countries' concern about the scenario described by Akramania, becoming targets in a regional conflict they did not wish to be involved in. The geography of the U.S. military presence is such that any conflict spreading across the region would affect several countries and potentially disrupt regional economies, shipping, and stability. Iran responded to Trump's statement about help on the way as incitement, urging protesters to continue their actions. Iranian officials characterized Trump's statements as interference, contributing to unrest in the country. Some sources report that protests in some parts of the country have subsided, but the situation is difficult to independently verify. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei stated that some protesters are doing so to please Trump, portraying the protests as externally provoked, rather than reflecting genuine internal grievances. Competing narratives about the protests illustrate the broader information conflict accompanying military tensions. American officials characterize the Iranian government's actions against protesters as repression. Iranian officials, in turn, characterize American statements as incitement. These competing narratives shape how each side interprets the other's actions and intentions. What Washington describes as support for democratic expression, Tehran describes as interference and destabilization. The narrative gap complicates any diplomatic resolution. According to Iranian state media, military officials stated that the previous conflict sharply increased military readiness. Air defense assets damaged in combat were repaired or replaced quickly, and new systems were introduced. Iranian officials emphasized that deterrence is no longer optional for Iran. This stance suggests that Tehran views its military capabilities as essential for national survival, rather than as a bargaining chip in its security policy. Iranian officials highlighted what they describe as will, morale, motivation, and determination, alongside material capabilities. Quote, 4 Iranian officials stated, according to state media coverage. And now Iran insists that its soldiers are already on alert. This position portrays Iran as ready for conflict, while leaving room for a diplomatic resolution if conditions change. The current crisis is characterized by a standoff between Washington and Tehran, with each side demonstrating strength and resolve, expecting the other to back down. This tense dynamic creates pressure while risking miscalculation due to misinterpretation of the opposing side's intentions. The American side emphasizes its military might and readiness to use it if necessary, while the Iranian side focuses on regional reach, immediate response, and the possibility of a prolonged conflict. Each side presents its position as strong enough to achieve victory or impose unacceptable costs on the adversary. The competition in deterrence creates uncertainty about whether the parties will follow through on their stated positions. Deterrence is effective when threats are credible but not executed. The current situation tests whether threats will remain rhetorical or turn into concrete actions. Experts note that the gap between the stated positions of the parties, American demands for Iran to abandon nuclear ambitions, and Iranian insistence on deterrence, may prove difficult to bridge through negotiations. Nevertheless, the alternative to military conflict carries risks recognized by both sides. Despite military warnings, diplomatic efforts continue. Various regional powers are trying to prevent escalation of the conflict. The Iranian foreign minister is expected to visit Turkey for an official visit, and according to an Iranian foreign ministry spokesman, diplomatic trips continue in parallel with military warnings, reflecting Iran's dual approach, demonstrating readiness for battle and simultaneously for negotiations. Regional powers have a significant interest in preventing a conflict that would affect their own security and economies. Diplomatic activity reflects these interests and the recognition that a military conflict between the US and Iran would have far-reaching consequences. The success of diplomatic efforts depends on decisions made in Washington and Tehran, which external actors can influence, but not control. According to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, the potential for negotiations between the US and Iran has not yet been exhausted, and any use of force against Tehran could create chaos in the region. Russia's position adds to the international voices calling for restraint and continued diplomacy. Russian President Vladimir Putin informed his UAE counterpart that Moscow is closely monitoring the situation around Iran, reflecting concerns about potential American military actions and their consequences for regional stability. Akramania's warning, presented by Iranian officials, is perceived as a clear message emphasizing no miscalculations, an immediate response, and no expectations of a limited conflict. This message aims to eliminate any American expectations of a quick, limited, and insignificant strike on Iran. Whether this message is heard may determine the further course of events. The statement positions Akramania's warning as Iran's final word before a potential conflict, placing responsibility for the consequences on the initiator of military action. The warning presents Iranian deterrence rhetoric in its most explicit form, leaving no ambiguity about Tehran's stated intentions. However, stated intentions and actual capabilities differ, and the outcome of any conflict will depend on factors not fully known to external observers. The crisis continues with active military positioning and diplomatic efforts. American forces continue to move into the region, while Iranian officials issue warnings about the consequences of an attack. Neither the trajectory toward conflict nor resolution is certain based on available information. Trump's statements about communications with the Iranians and ships heading to the region reflect the dual nature of U.S. policy: pressure, combined with openness to negotiations. The gap between the parties' positions may narrow through negotiations, remain stable through mutual deterrence, or lead to conflict due to miscalculation or deliberate choice. The current moment represents a critical turning point where various outcomes are possible. For observers tracking the situation, the combination of Akramania's detailed warnings and Trump's statements suggests that both sides are preparing for various scenarios. What happens next depends on decisions yet to be made in Washington and Tehran, with consequences extending far beyond both capitals.